To really understand our passage from Jeremiah 31 through 34 today, we have to know a little bit about covenants. Covenants were promises that God made with his people that were often contingent on their behavior. So if they behaved in a certain way, God would give certain blessings in return. And he did this with a number of people throughout history. He did this with Abraham. He did this, of course, with the Israelites when they were being led by Moses out of Egypt. And there is this new covenant predicted in Jeremiah, which would, of course, be fulfilled with the coming of Christ and Christ's death on the cross. And it's still, honestly, in the process of being accomplished in that way. And God often would make these promises as a way to kind of set up promises for his people, but also to try to direct their behavior in a way that is appealing to God, that is appropriate to God. And we are all really, in truth, children of covenants. Us as Christians are a part of all of this. It's not just the Jewish people, but there is an element that needs to be emphasized here, and it's emphasized within Jeremiah in this passage from Jeremiah as well, which is that the Israelites did break that covenant with God. They broke that sort of original Mosaic covenant with God. They were not obedient to God. They were not obedient to the commands that God gave them. And God did bring punishment down on them for that. But God never abandoned Israel. God never gave up on his people. God, in many ways, was trying to correct Israel to bring them back to the point of living that he wanted out of them. That's really what it sort of is. It's sort of the punishment of a parent to a child, though obviously a lot more extreme with a lot more death and oppression. But that's kind of the idea here, is that God hasn't abandoned Israel, though they have violated the terms of the covenant and now have to deal with the consequences for that. And this is all kind of weaved in with God's redemptive plan, that God makes these promises of a redemption for his people, of a time when everything is sort of set right in the world. And those are promises that God is making, oftentimes tied in with these sort of moral sort of living. Obviously, not all of them are, as when we were talking about kind of the end sort of time when everything is set right. That is something that will happen regardless of human behavior. But commonly, these sort of promises were made, especially in the Old Testament, that had to kind of, you had an expectation of what you were supposed to be living as, and God would bring these promises to you. And I think it's important for us to kind of really understand this, to really sort of grasp this. We are, of course, at the time of this recording, right at the edge of the end of 2024, and we're heading into 2025. And it's always a good idea, I think, when we're heading into kind of a new year, to take some time and reflect and even plan out into our next year, and try to kind of assess where we are as people. And I think spiritually we should be doing that as well. And I mean, obviously we should do it at more times than just New Year's. It should be a sort of constant behavior. But New Year's, because it's kind of a tradition within our culture, is a great time to sort of sit down and really kind of look at where you are, how you're living in your walk with Christ, and sort of, make, a commitment back towards God, recommit to the covenant. There are times in Israel's history where, even though the people would go astray, they would kind of fall back. They would kind of find again this covenant that they had with God, that they would kind of find their way back to it and would sort of recommit themselves in that sort of way. And I want to encourage you all to do that at home, kind of you're on your own time. Take some time to reflect, to think of the ways that you are walking well with God and what you really need to work on over in the next year, and have some really serious conversations with God. And I would encourage you to write it down. Write out, a little bit of just a promise to God of what you are going to work on in the next year to be a better servant of God Himself. To better sort of capture who God is around people around you, those types of things. And write it out, pray about it, really take some time with it, and make that sort of promise, sort of make your own sort of covenant with God, though not necessarily expecting blessings to come from it. Do it because, you are, as someone who has been redeemed by God, you really want to be serving God in the way that God really wants you to be serving Him, and to be living in the way that God really wants you to be living in. So I would encourage you all to do that, to take some time to write that out, to make some promises with God, and to do your best to fulfill them over this next year, because we are redeemed by the blood of Christ, but we are still expected to live in a way that is holy towards God, and to live in the world in a way that furthers God's kingdom. And so we all need to take time every once in a while to make sure that we are still doing that, so that we can live as true reflections of Jesus Christ. Amen. And now I'd like to invite you all to join me for our last worship song today.